Yeah, this is for Matt.
Oh,
Oh, that's it. Get ready to do the show. That a boy, Sheehan. Coming
oh,
in hot, Joe. I
oh,
like it. Listen,
oh.
before we get to the actual baseball stuff, I saw your tweet and it sparked a conversation. We put it in the rundown today talking about the beer sales. I don't know if you were able to hear our discussion, but you kind of mentioned to me you got a little pushback. You got a take on this thing with the beer sales and then pushing it back to the eighth inning at all?
Yeah, I'm with Matt Strom, and I'm really surprised to hear a player come out and talk about this. But the original idea, and I want to say this started in the 1980s, of these cutoffs was at a time when drunk driving was a really big issue in society. Now, I got to be honest with you guys. I don't know. I don't track how big an issue it is today. But we've had these cutoffs, not just to keep fans in the stands sober, but to make sure that when they get to the parking lot, get behind the wheel of their car, they've had some time between their last drink and driving to actually make things a little bit safer. Now, I think Strom brings up a great point. Moving the beer sales forward an inning seems to me like it would increase the chance of fans being impaired when they get behind the wheel of the car. If you hold it steady, as Matt pointed out, you're really actually, because the last couple of innings are playing out more quickly, you're making it more likely. The logical thing would be to push it back an inning. I don't think teams are going to do that. Now, they studied this in the minor leagues last year. Baseball America had a good report. Apparently, concession sales weren't that affected in the minors by the pitch clock. But I guess teams are seeing early on in the season now that they are selling less beer and they're trying to make sure they get a few more sales. But guys, as somebody who doesn't drive and doesn't drink a ton of beer, maybe I'm not the guy to talk about this, but it really feels to me like if you're selling beer in the eighth inning, and let's say for the sake of argument, the team goes down 1-2-3 in the ninth and the game's over. You're talking about a guy literally leaving, walking to the exit with half a beer in his hand.
Yeah.
I don't really think that helps, the person who's not at the ball game who's just trying to get home on the highway, who's now got to contend with this guy driving.
Right.
Again, I will admit here that I'm a little bit out of my depth in terms of the science and in terms of the studying of traffic and driving. I want to make that clear. But just on a baseline feel, it seems to me that this increases the risk of fans leaving the ballpark impaired.
You don't even drive, Joe, do you?
I do not.
Yeah. So you're a terrible
But
person.
it's
that you don't have to
logic
drive.
though. I mean,
I have opinions on all kinds of things I can't actually do. Don't worry about it.
but it's just a logic, and I'm with you on that point. I do it every day. But the funny thing about the conversation is that logic is going to win out here, and business is going in the face of logic. Like business is going opposite. What do you think the pushback internally is going to be? Like, wait a minute, we need to make sure we're making X number of dollars, and if it puts our fans at risk, so be it.
I was pretty surprised by how many people were either didn't care or were actually supporting this idea online. I had a couple of tweets about it on Monday, Tuesday night, I think it was. And there were a lot of people just like, it's fine. A lot of people were made jokes about it's Milwaukee. They can handle their drink. But I fear that this is only going to get reversed when something tragic happens.
Right.
The motivation for this in the 1980s wasn't so much that MLB teams wanted to be good corporate citizens or good social citizens. It was pressure from outside groups. This was when Mothers Against Drunk Driving,
right,
putting pressure on teams to say, hey, look, you got to cut off beer sales so that fewer people will leave the park drunk. Now, one of the other things teams do is they limit you to how many beers you can get. I guess it's 2 per person.
Right.
You can basically walk up to a concession counter and walk away with a case. They don't let you. That was Yankee in the 80s. Things were different then. But yeah, they limited that so that fans aren't getting that drunk in the park. When I heard Strom had an objection, I thought it was going to be because he thought it would increase offensive fan behavior because there would be more drunk in the park. He's actually at the actual point, which is more about when they leave the park. So I think this conversation is going to continue. But Matt, I fear that this is only going to get reversed when something truly bad happens.
Right.
Agreed. I'm with you there. That stinks.
I was going to ask you about, the drinking is one thing and unruly fan behavior is another. Joe, do you buy into this bullshit argument that fans are more unruly now because of the gambling and that, all the prop betting and like baseball fans have been saying nasty stuff to baseball players for 100 years. You went to games at Yankee Stadium for a long time. You've been to parks all over the country. We sat together the last time you were here and went to a game in Las Vegas. That was actually a pretty mild night. But is this how I don't agree with the gambling being the cause of more of stuff. Do you think there's more to that argument?
I think there's a lack of grasp of the history of the game. If you go back to the 90s, 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, ballparks were rowdy places. People throwing
Mm.
actual glass bottles at the players, coming out of the to fight them. And it wasn't, there was no way to bet the over 1.5 total bases on Tris Speaker in 1915.
Thank
So,
God.
and one of the things that, and this gets into a lot of
Uh,
this, again, it's not just sports. We see and hear a lot of, I can curse on this show, right?
You
Of
can say
course.
whatever you want, Joseph.
We hear and see a lot more assholes because of social media, Twitter, Instagram, what have you. So when somebody is mad because somebody didn't hit their strikeout prop, or they didn't cover the 1.5, or some college kid missed a free throw, there's a venue for them to express that to all of us in a way there wasn't for
Mm.
most of the last 125
Mm.
years. So no, with a lot of these things, I don't think it's social media, and I don't think it's gambling in terms of baseball. I think it's just people are this way, and we see it more because we have more access to their opinions. For the most part,
okay.
this company now, aside, most people's opinions aren't worth hearing.
That's fair point on that. So there's a correlation here between hockey and baseball that I want to make for 1 second. So the Boston Bruins they've got everybody telling me and every Bruins fan that the President's Cup, they set the record, most points, most wins. You're not winning the cup because of this. The Rays right now are playing the Red Sox. It's 1-1 in the third inning. If they win the game, they start 13-0. They tie the record for the best start in the last 80 years in Major League Baseball at 13-0. The answer everyone is saying whenever you're like, man, their run differential is 65 right now. They have more home runs hit than runs given up. And all I hear back is, yeah, they'll choke in October. Does it matter? Does the start matter to you at all for the Rays?
Well, historically, the start hasn't mattered. If you look at the 6 longest winning streaks in baseball history to start a season, just one of those teams won a championship. But if you look at long winning streaks throughout history, it doesn't really matter as much. The longest winning streak in baseball history was by a 4th place team back in 1916. Dave probably remembers that. I think that one of the things we've lost in baseball is the appreciation of a great regular season performance. The recent Dodgers teams being the best example of that. You go to the NBA. Did people remember that the Warriors went 73-9, or do they remember that they lost their last game? We've lost the ability to appreciate the regular season. So there's no correlation. The fact that the Bruins ran away with the President's Cup doesn't make them more or less likely to win the Stanley Cup.
Preach on, Joseph. Thank you.
If the Rays are 105-57, look, they're still going to have to play a best of 5 series in October. And there's not, when you put 2 good teams in a best of 5, especially in baseball, there's just not that much difference between them. So I think that we need to come to the idea that we need to be able to appreciate regular season performance the way we did for most of sports history, and then recognize the tournament for what it is.
Joe, I mean, talking about regular season performance, I got one of my dear friends. He's a Yankee fan. His name's Sean. He's watching the show right now.
Sorry, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankee fans, I mean, Joe looks so good in that Yankee hat. I mean, really, it's amazing what the Yankees have done in the regular season and their inability to close a deal and win a World Series. It's been one of those things, but the regular season right now is being greatly affected by these rule changes. Is it not? Or are we, by being in our vacuum, in our world of, doing content and stuff, are we seeing things that aren't there? Or what are you seeing, at least immediately, as far as the game being affected by these rule changes?
Well, the games are certainly being played faster. We've chopped 29 minutes, I think, off an average 9-inning game. The pitch clock has had that effect. Stolen bases are up because defenses are hamstrung as to how they can defend against the steal. Pitchers can no longer vary their timing very much. They can't throw over 4 or 5 times. There's also a big clock on the field that tells the base runner, hey, the pitcher's got to do something here pretty soon. I think all those factors are going into the increased steal rate and the success rate. And then finally, the shift ban has largely affected single line drive singles to right field. Infielders can still align themselves where they think ground balls are going to go for the most part, but there's no longer that player in short right field, that rover spot. So you've seen left-handed line drive hitters, their average on line drives has gone up. So yes, there have been some changes in the game. The biggest factor so far this year, at least early on, was that we were using a more lively ball than we were last year. We can track this stuff. You look at not just the way the ball performs the drag on the ball. We can actually calculate that. But you look at things like home runs per fly ball, home runs per contact, the slugging average on contact. All of those numbers were up. So all of these things have risen in the first couple of weeks, and they're kind of all getting conflated. We've made so many changes at once. It's going to be hard to isolate the impact of any.
Interesting. So this juiced ball theory was put into place a couple of years ago. We started doing some research on it. We saw Major League Baseball changing the ball halfway into the season, then during the postseason. So do you think they're going to change it back? Because we've seen guys like Alex Cora say, hey, wait a minute, I've never seen the ball fly out of Fenway Park like this. And the numbers backed it up for what the Red Sox did in early April. We were seeing way more home runs than normal early in the season. Does baseball do what they did before, but in reverse and put a dead ball this summer in play?
I guess there are two questions here. One is the ball different? And it certainly early on appears to be on the higher range of how well it flies. The work of Bradford William Davis and Dr. Meredith Wills has shown that baseball used 3 different balls last year.
Joe, don't they have to tell people that they're
Nope.
using 3 different balls during the season?
Nope.
Here's the thing. Here's the question. Do we, and this is where my biases come into play. Do we think baseball is bright enough, competent enough to actually control this? Or
Yes.
is it that they just have no control of what baseball is being used in a given year? And I have to tell you guys, I tend to lean towards the latter.
Are
think
you
they
serious?
process. I truly believe that the baseball varies from year to year, not out of intent, but out of just kind of a lack of control over the process.
So wait, so Joe, so let's just play this out. So we have Aaron Judge going for a record-setting home run chase. The last time we saw a home run chase like this, everybody stopped. ESPN did what we saw with Bonds, or not Bonds, but with McGuire and Sosa with the dual screens. People were pissed off. They were breaking into basketball coverage, breaking into everything to show Aaron Judge's at-bats on national TV. And you're telling me baseball had nothing to do with the ball being juiced in August and September?
What's interesting, some of the research that was done last year showed that Aaron Judge, and I want to again credit Bradford William Davis of Insider for looking into this, showed that the balls in the Yankee games were on the high end of tolerability, if you will. And actually, look, and I want to make this clear here. Aaron Judge has nothing to do with this. Aaron Judge isn't going into the freezer, David Stern style, and picking out the cold baseballs. He's nothing to do with him. But it does seem like in Yankee games last year that there were livelier balls in play.
Just happened to be the guy chasing the record. That just happened to be
that way.
That's
unbelievable. I mean, like, I don't know that's.
Baseball's always had this problem. You go back to I'm old enough to remember 1987. You guys probably are too. Where ball 86 was a decent hitter's year, but the 87 the ball's flat until the 90s. 87 had the highest rate of home runs ever. It was this crazy year, and then for the next 5 years,
was that the year that
Dale Sway, everybody you've never heard of hit 30 home runs.
Wally Joyner hit almost 40. What was that guy that played left field for the Orioles? Brady?
More than 10 in a year.
What was his name? Brady? The guy that
no, Brady Anderson was in the 90s.
No, it was in the 90s. The Orioles with Brady Anderson.
He had an unbelievable.
That was 95, I believe.
They used the hot balls then. That's for sure.
Well, no, he used the hot needle. Different situation. That's what
whatever he was using, it was working because the ball was flying out off his bat. I remember him being very valuable in fantasy.
Yes.
Joe, can we use these fancy balls that fly out over anywhere in Pittsburgh? Because the Pirates have started out with a winning record. It's only April 13th. But, Joe, give me some hope. Give me some dreams. Give me some reality check if I need it. But are the Pirates going to win 66.5 games or more? Please tell me yes.
Reason you're picking that number? I can't imagine why.
That was what their season win total closed, and somebody might have some action on it. I'm just curious what you think about the Buccos because O'Neal Cruz doesn't know how to slide.
That's a really painful, no pun intended, but it's a painful injury for your 66.5. They don't have a great backup option. We'll see. Gosh, I don't even know his game. G1 Bay might get some time there. I'm not even sure they're going to go with, but we'll see. It's supposed to be about 4 months, so maybe he comes back at the end of the year. Maybe they decide they don't want to risk it with him. But there are a lot of reasons to be happy. Mitch Keller, he's building on what he did last year. Look, Brian Reynolds looks like he might stay there now, and he's off to a fantastic start. Brian Hayes, one of the best defensive third basemen in the game. They're slowly building a core. Now, Whether they get to 67 wins this year, obviously Cruz hurts them. If David Bednar is having a good year, do you trade him? How many of these guys are actually going to be here at the end of the year? Remember, the Pirates don't care if they win 67 games. This is one of the problems with betting the over on some of these bad teams. I ran into this last year with the Rays where they were well on pace to hit their number, and they didn't seem to try to win a lot of games at the end of the year so they could play the Guardians in the playoffs. With bad teams at the end of the year, they don't want to win. So you're betting kind of against what they're trying to do. So I think you might run into that with this Pirates team where the wins don't matter to them as much as they matter to you at the end of the year.
That division stinks, does it not?
It does. But they're playing fewer games in division too. So there's less of an effect there.
Absolutely. So on this show, I tend to be the Angels basher because I can't stand that two generational players are on a roster that is not really built to win. And we may have to suffer through, seeing Ohtani and Trout never play in a real meaningful game. They played in the World Baseball Classic against each other. And that was the first time we actually saw real pressure packed, meaningful baseball between the two guys. They're in first place starting today. It's very early. They're 7-5. What do you make of the Angels, their rotation, and can they be relevant this summer?
Yeah, I was on them this year. I've got them winning, I think, 91 games and winning one of those wild card spots. And you mentioned the rotation. That's the key for me. They finally developed largely a homegrown rotation with Patrick Sandoval, who I love. Jose Suarez got knocked around a couple nights ago. Reed Detmers, who threw a no-hitter and then got demoted last year. He looks like he's ready to be established. They've got guys behind Ohtani now to fill things out. Their rotation last year in the second half was very strong. They also went out. And, when you start with Trout and Ohtani, and I get your frustration, Matt, it's been frustrating seeing Mike Trout play 3 playoff games during what is one of the great careers in baseball history. But they finally put players around them that are just average. That's all you have to do is put an average team around these guys. So that's Gio Urshela. That's Hunter Renfroe. That's Brandon Drury. None of these guys individually are going to move the needle, but they mean that instead of having replacement level talent at those spots, you've got average talent. And an average team around those two guys will win 91 games. So I'm excited for them this year. The other thing, too, is we've never seen Trout and Ohtani really at the peak of their powers. These last 2 years when Ohtani's been great, Trout's been hurt. I want to say 140 games last year, 100 games last year, and like 40 the year before.
Yeah.
They're both playing 150 games. You're talking about two guys that could combine for, 18 wins among replacement. Just ridiculous numbers. So the keys are, can those two guys stay healthy? And, can that rotation, which is a bunch of left-handers behind Ohtani, do what I think it's going to do? I think they're going to make the playoffs this year. And I'm usually with you, Matt. I'm usually predicting them not to.
Joe, we're out on the West Coast, and we've had this discussion, and, nobody sees Ohtani play. Half the United States is asleep and all these other things. That's one thing that contributes to that. But, like, I'm wearing a Dodger hat. There's some great baseball being played late night East Coast between Dodgers, Padres, Diamondbacks. What are you thinking NL West? Just a round overview, what you've seen so far, and maybe who you think might win the division for the people that might partake in that type of interest from a knowledgeable person like yourself.
I thought the Dodgers, a lot of people were running off the Dodgers at the start of the year, kind of forgetting how high a level that they'd established. For the last 3 years, they won 2/3 of their games. They won 111 games last year. They could be 15 games worse and still win this division. And obviously, no Walker Buehler. They're paying Trevor Bauer to pitch in Japan. The injuries, Gavin Lux hurt them. Terry Turner left for Philadelphia. But when you look at what that team can do in terms of bringing up its own talent, James Outman has showed out these first couple of weeks. Miguel Vargas. You look at all of the young pitchers they're going to be bringing forward. I have the Dodgers winning that division by a couple games over the Padres. We're not going to know what this looks like for another week. I believe it's actually next Thursday. Fernando Tatis Jr. comes off of his suspension, and we see the Padres are at full Death Star. And I think that's going to be – Padres are kind of like, without Musgrove, without Tatis, kind of faking their way through the first couple of weeks here. We're going to see what they look like when they get Tatis and Musgrove back in a couple Tatis next week and Musgrove in a couple of weeks.
A similar question, but to the AL. The Rangers look like they might have something with DeGrom at the top of the rotation. They've spent money on defense. They've got the offense, obviously. Can the Rangers challenge the Astros in the West?
I don't think so, because they're going to have a lot of trouble getting guys on base. A problem that got worse this week when Corey Seager went on the IL.
Right.
He's going to be 4 to 6 weeks. It's just a thin lineup. They do hit for some power. Adolis Garcia, Josh Young, Marcus Semien. But by and large, it's going to be very hard for them to get enough runners on base to keep the line moving and have a productive offense. I don't love the back of that rotation. And while, Jose Leclerc, Will Smith, these guys have all had success, by and large, that's not a very strong bullpen. So this is a Rangers team that could still lose some games late. They were terrible in close games last year. That's what actually got Chris Woodward fired. Now that tends to be a luck thing from year to year. So they're going to get some bounce back. But I look at this bullpen as the year goes on. I think it's going to get worn down. And again, we're counting on DeGrom staying healthy. If you tell me DeGrom makes 32 starts, they're in the wild card race. If you tell me DeGrom makes 32 starts, though, I'm probably going to start looking for the end of the world.
I'll bet under on DeGrom starts at 32 for sure. Yeah. All right. No action.
Yeah.
Last one for me, Joseph. First of all, before you answer the question, make sure you tell everybody where to find you, find your newsletter. If you guys like baseball 100%, you should subscribe to Joe's newsletter because he do a great job. You sit in the dungeon there, although you're letting light in, and it looks great, Joe. I mean, it's really nice. But all you do is sit there and write and read and watch games. It's amazing stuff. A great way to spend your summer. But, Joe,
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And we'll, again, don't forget to tell them before I ask you this question. I got to listen to this guy all year talk about the Bruins winning the Stanley Cup, the Celtics winning the NBA championship. It's Bostonian versus the book. We took it on a whim, and we did it. And now the whole world is centered around Boston. Boston versus the world. It's annoying as shit, Joe. But the one good thing that we have working, Joe, is this absolute disaster of a baseball team called the Red Sox this season, Joe. Can you please just tell the people watching that the Red Sox are hopefully going to finish dead last in the American League East? Yes or no?
Yeah, probably fourth. We'll see how these injuries.
Who's worse?
Yoshida's hurt. The Orioles are running back last year's team, which is fine, but they had flaws on last year's team. They didn't build out the pitching staff the way they should have this winter. They didn't spend any money. So I think the Orioles coming into the season look worse than the Red Sox. We haven't seen much out of Sale and Kluber yet, though. The question has always been, would those two guys stay healthy and make 30 starts? The question I didn't think to ask was, are they any good anymore?
Right.
They both got around pretty good so far.
Right.
So I had them going 83 and 79. I thought the offense would carry them. I thought they'd win a lot of games like they did that first series against the Orioles. But you look at the bottom of that lineup now. They threw out a lineup yesterday that looked like something out of Sarasota split squad. Yu Chang and Tanner Wong. I mean, I keep looking to see if maybe, I don't know, some of these guys from my youth are going to be on. Is Tony Armas going to play for them next?
Wow. Yeah, it's fair.
It looks rough. And it's going to be interesting because, Chaim Bloom inherited this. He didn't sign Chris Sale. He inherited Chris Sale.
Right.
He didn't screw up the farm system. Dave Dombrowski traded away everything in the farm system. I think he's taking a lot of blame. Also, too, John Henry decided, I don't want to spend as much money anymore.
Right.
So you have a weak farm system. You have this killer contract, $30 million a year, about 15% of their payroll going to Chris Sale. And when you have a farm system, with an owner who doesn't want to spend money anymore, that's a really tough situation. John Henry, I think, wants to be the Rays, or at least a somewhat more expensive version of the Rays. But by letting Dombrowski build a championship team, he took away from that plan. I hope he gives Bloom enough time to rebuild that farm system.
The fans are not going to give Chaim Bloom enough time to rebuild the farm system. That's the problem, is that the fans are getting frustrated by the way the team is spending, by the lack thereof, and also just the big contracts that they've not spent. Xander Bogaerts going to San Diego and knocking the cover off the ball does not help Chaim Bloom. It helped the Red Sox as Mookie Betts went to the Dodgers, won a championship. Bogaerts is now playing really, really well. Those are guys that normally Red Sox fans would see as a lifer in a Red Sox uniform, and it's not happening. So that's part of the problem with the Red Sox with Chaim Bloom, is that, well, yeah, the fans have gone 5 years without a championship, but where is the future? Agreed. I know you're a Yankee fan. You understand that, though. But could the Red Sox
turning them into Pittsburgh? He's turning the Red Sox into Pittsburgh. An owner that don't want to spend, don't keep your best players, let them leave when they get really good. Sounds a lot like the Pirates.
Unless Is there any way in your mind that the Red Sox could find a way to get Yoshi's good friend from Team Japan to come over when we see Ohtani as a free agent in the offseason?
That would require a significant change in John Henry's approach over the last couple of years. We haven't seen Henry write the big checks for $500 million players. There's a pretty comfortable assumption that the Dodgers have been doing all of the things they've been doing or not doing with an eye towards signing Ohtani. Steve Cohen is always going to be lurking. We're talking about a player who may be the first $500 million player in baseball. And I guess
The Mets?
I guess he'd be the first because
Yeah.
Pat Mahomes is really going to make $500 million on that contract. So Ohtani would be the first player guaranteed $500 million. But yeah, Cohen doesn't seem to care about the luxury tax thresholds, the penalties. He seems perfectly willing to go out and pay that kind of money. So I think with those two big monsters out there, it really is going to come down to setting aside whether Ohtani wants to play in Boston, in Fenway, with Rashid, any of that. It's is Henry going to play at that level for that type of player? And Ohtani, he knows he's going to get paid. The other question is, where do I want to go to win? And it's very hard for any team to compete with what the Dodgers have built in Chavez Ravine, which is we win every year. If you want to win.
Damn it. What happened to Joe? He froze. All right.
He's
Joe,
back.
tell him. JoeSheehan.com. Tell him where else, please, before we get you out of here.
At Joe_Sheehan on Twitter. I try to be on there less, but yeah, the newsletter is the main thing. JoeSheehan.com. I posted a couple of free pieces this week. You can check that out. I love the game, love writing about the game. I've been fortunate to do it now for 25 years. So please check it out. JoeSheehan.com.
Phenomenal stuff, Joe. Thank you for the time. Really appreciate you coming on.
Tip, brother.
Ellis.
That is Joe Sheehan joining us here.